So today we're joined by Chuck Keller of Order from Chaos, Aries Kingdom, Vulpecula, the guitar magician, and basically a metal historian at this point. Um, he's one of the most knowledgeable people in the underground about all things extreme metal from the 80s and early 90s. He's basically like a living legend at this point. So welcome, Chuck.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
You do me too much honor.
So why don't we start out by talking about the upcoming Aries Kingdom tour, since that's just right around the corner next week. So how did you get on that bill? And yeah, go ahead.
I don't really remember exactly how we got on the bill, other than one day Alex said that Amos Rifkin, that does Mass Destruction Fest down in Atlanta, was asking us to come down and play. And oh, by the way, would we like to tour with Bulldozer? Well, yeah. So it ended up being Bulldozer, Deceased, us, and a band out of the Carolinas called The Misers. Really brilliant black thrash band, young, hungry, brutal, great guys. And we went out last November for 2.5 weeks, something like that, and just had an absolute blast together. It was unbelievable. I mean, the way all the bands got along, and just the power of the show every night. Plus, Bulldozer brought one of the most old school sets I've seen since the old school. It was just that good every single night. So that went really well. And even before that tour was over, towards the end of November, everybody started talking about, well, we need to do this on the West Coast. And so Amos, who was the guy that was the tour manager, said, yeah, I think I can make that happen. And lo and behold, he did. And so now we're going out with them. We leave Thursday to play a couple of shows, and I think we join up with them in Texas, and then head across the Southwest over to San Diego, LA, up California. Hopefully we survive up in all the way up into Vancouver, where we get to play the Witch's Hammer again.
No.
And yeah, it's gonna be awesome.
Yeah, so Bulldozer still sounds like Bulldozer. They don't sound like Dance Got Sick.
No, what they're doing is celebrating their 40th year, which I guess that was last year, but they're really focusing on first album and second album. So it's almost all of Day of Wrath, except for Endless Funeral and a couple of songs off of Final Separation. That's it.
That's great.
And I saw Bulldozer when we played with them at Metal Threat in 2016, and it was good, but it was a different Bulldozer. Right. AC wasn't playing bass. He had the cool Bloody Lectern, which is awesome. But they only played Whiskey Time from Day of Wrath. And the song that got me into Bulldozer was Insurrection of the Living Damned. So I was a little bit sad about that. Well, they come back, we do this tour with them, and they're just basically doing the first album, and a lot of Final Separation is perfection. It's exactly what you want out of them.
Right.
And it sounds like the old Bulldozer.
Wow.
I mean, it's 2/3 of the original band, right? Plus, a couple other guys who are all brilliant players. And yeah, it's going to be awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, looking forward to seeing you guys and Bulldozer next week, and of course Deceased as well. So we finally got the record back from the factory after more than a year of delays due to the pandemic. The funny thing is, well, maybe it's not so funny, but records that I put into production after Aries Kingdom came back faster, because by then the production timeline had cleared up and there wasn't this clog in the system. So Aries Kingdom just got scheduled, I guess, at the wrong time. I still have other records that are still in queue for, it's been in queue for like over a year or whatever. So, well, it's out, and people are really liking it. So do you want to talk about In Darkness at Last a little bit? This is the latest album by Aries Kingdom.
Yeah, so this album I mean, every band will tell you that their latest album is their favorite. That's really what you do. But I mean, honestly, this is pretty much my favorite AK album. I feel like that it brings together all the things that we've done throughout our career, even before Aries Kingdom, and supercharges all of them, puts them on steroids. It's just the album is what I wanted it to be. And it's funny because I never stopped writing between By the Light of Their Destruction and In Darkness at Last. I just went right from one right into the other. Um, and so all the music was done basically as I think I finished the last song as the pandemic started. Um, and so all we had to do was sit around and rehearse. So we thought, well, we've only done 3 shows for By the Light, which is a little criminal, but there's nothing we could do about that. So let's just do another album, and then we spend a few years playing shows, touring, supporting the last 2 records, and we rehearsed all the stuff, recorded it, and just as the pandemic was ending, then it came out, and here we are.
Mhm.
You know, we've already done the one tour with Bulldozer last November, and we'll do another one starting next week, and whatever else comes up.
Yeah, I think in a way it's kind of going back to the OFC days, a lot more linear and aggressive, in my opinion. Was that intentional or did it just happen?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it was intentional because I was never fully satisfied with By the Light, and that made me angry
Mm.
and, and frustrated. And so a lot of that anger and frustration, you can hear that in Darkness at Last. So yeah, it was in a way my, I don't want to call it disappointment, but I mean, for lack of a better word, yeah, my disappointment with By the Light got funneled into In Darkness and made it an even more focused and vicious record. I think it's probably our most violent, vicious album to date.
Yeah.
You know, you look at the first couple of albums, and it was us playing and, you know, kind of showing off what we can do, as if people didn't already know,
Mm.
but really focusing on playing. And then Unburial Dead was mixing the first 2 records, so to speak, and under, instead of just a collection of songs, it was kind of a quasi conceptual record
Mm.
about the First World War. And after that, I'm like, okay, I'm done. I'm not gonna do that anymore. I'm happy with that. Let's move on. And so I was kind of worried. As a matter of fact, it was 2015, right as we were playing your benefit gig for the warehouse
Mhm.
out there in Oakland. But it hit me. I'm casting around looking for a new direction. Where am I going to go from here? I was really worried. And it was around the time we did the benefit show that it hit me that there's a lot of unused Vulpecula ideas that were just abandoned in '99 when Chris and I stopped the band.
Mhm.
And I'll pick those up and do those with Aries Kingdom. And and that was really a catalyst that I needed. I was really excited about that. And that's where obviously you look at the conceptual and topical differences between Unburial Dead, Incendiary, Return to Dust. Compare those to what we've been doing lately, and it's not. It's a very different kind of approach, and certainly different topics
Mhm.
and themes. And it was exactly what I needed at the time I needed it to happen. So, you know, I was excited. I started writing, didn't stop writing. I spit out 2 albums worth within a couple of years, which is absolutely unheard of for me. Because I mean, even back in the OFC era, I would take months to write one song. And if Pete and I were writing together, you know, it's like maybe he was doing the lyrics or throwing in a few riffs here, or vice versa. It would take us months to come up with one song. And a lot of that was due to inexperience, but also we just thought that's the way it had to be, and it worked great. But it was a very slow, grinding process. And as I got older, and all the songwriting fell on me, then I had the extra responsibility of knowing how to construct a record and still write music that you're interested in, and that excites you as well as your bandmates. So, with Aries Kingdom, the first few albums were, me kind of doing what I wanted to do, but being sure that we were all together mentally. And fortunately, we were. I mean, Alex and Mike are absolutely on the same page. So it all works out. And so, when I write the music, I'll come together. I'll send them demos, guitar demos of what I've done, of what I want the songs to be, and then I'll talk with first with Mike. This is what I'm thinking about for rhythms, but only occasionally have I ever really insisted do this. This part absolutely needs this. Most of the time, it's just let him do what he wants to do, and it almost always falls into exactly what I wanted it to be anyway. So maybe that's a function of Mike and I having known each other for decades. We just know how each other thinks, and musically we're closer to being on the same page than a lot of maybe other bandmates are. In other bands, I mean. And with Alex, he's I show him the guitar parts. He'll come up with his own bass parts. I'll hand him the lyrics and say, "This is what I'm thinking for, the meter across this riff. Maybe it needs to be da 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 da. But at the same time, I'm very clear about you've got to do these live, so make them what you need them to be." And again, I mean, almost always it comes out to how I had originally envisioned it. So it's all great with me, and I'm happy about it. So it was around 90, 91 where Pete and I were beginning to write more separately. And of course, we come together and bounce ideas off each other, as well as with Mike, because when Order from Chaos would pull songs together, it was mainly in the rehearsal room. And so and we were all inexperienced songwriters, so it made sense to have three brains on one song. But as a result, it made things really slow. I mean, we wrote at a glacial pace, and as we became more comfortable with the writing process on our own, that's where we began to write entire songs on our own. About the only, I mean, even you think about the Conqueror of Fear suite, there's only a couple of songs that maybe I wrote all the music on Plateau and Angry Red Planet, but a song like Tenebrae was truly a band effort, because it was actually, that song descended from an old demo song called Apocalyptic Visions. And it was probably around 90 or 91 where we sat down and said, there's a lot of great things in Apocalyptic Visions, but it doesn't really fit with who we are. So let's just revamp it. It's kind of the Merciful Fate thing. You've got a bunch of riffs here in this song, and you're like, well, maybe we can use that over here, and just mix and match to whatever works. And so, Tenebrae was that. I think what else was in there. But yeah, anyway, that the point is that's where we really learned to write on our own. And as we got more and more confident, then obviously by the end of that band, then I was doing Vulpecula, and that was all my music. And in Aries Kingdom, it was I knew what I was doing, or at least I thought I did. Maybe I don't, but
yeah, you and Mike go back all the way to kindergarten or first grade or something, right?
Yeah, about 50 years. Yeah, I think it was first grade. And if you want to get pedantic, how long have you guys played together? Well, we started in fifth grade band, so 1977, 78. In a metal context, we played together briefly in the spring of '86. We were both seniors in high school, and we were just doing requisite Metallica covers, Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, blah blah blah. And that only lasted a couple of months. And the same time, I was playing with a couple of other buddies who they weren't quite as good as Mike, but we had fun. And by the fall of '86 is when I hooked up with this guy called Eric Smith, who was a mutual friend and Eric, he had a bunch of Metallica stuff, and I was a big Metallica fan at the time, and so I was trying to get a Metallica picture disc off of him. And so I had my friend, he said, well, he worked at a Dairy Queen. He's like, I have this friend that has this Metallica picture disc. I'm like, I want to try to get this off this guy. So give me his number. So I call Eric one night, and he's not going to sell it. Of course he's not. But then he starts asking, he's like, well, what other bands do you like? And I'm like, well, I like, Merciful Fate and Nuclear Assault and, Venom and Slayer. And I mean, at one point he just looks me, or he didn't look me, we're on the phone. He's really quiet. And out of the blue, he goes, you want to be in a band? Or he says, are you in a band? I said, no, I'm not in a band. Do you want to be in a band? I said, well, yeah. He goes, well, we've got a couple guitarists right now, but we'll just kick them out. And so he had me over, and that's where I met Pete. And we had a not so very good singer, Dave. He would have been a good singer if he could have controlled his alcohol intake. But anyway, met up with those guys, had a couple of uncomfortable rehearsals until the other two guys figured out, we're not really just going to do Sabbath and Priest and Iron Maiden covers anymore. We're going this different direction. And they eventually just kind of fell off. And so Pete and I played in that band with these other guys for about another 10 or 11 months. But about 6 months in, Pete and I were doing a lot of talking about music, and there were times where after we would practice, we'd go to this secluded park, and and Pete had a fake driver's license, and he looked older than the rest of us because he had longer hair than the rest of us. He just he had that older persona. And so he took his fake driver's license into Royal Liquor and would buy everybody booze. And so then we go to this park, and I wasn't a drinker back then, but all the other guys would get hammered, and Pete and I would sit in my car, because I was a designated driver, and talk about music. And we started thinking, maybe we can do our own thing. What do you think? Like, yeah, I think we should. And so he and I started writing the first OFC songs, Of Death and Dying, Quietus, and The Scourge. And we got to a point where we were ready to show it to the other guys. Wanted to bring them in on it. They weren't the least bit interested in doing any kind of original material. And we played in like July of '87, we played our last party, and it was an absolute disaster. If we had more time, I'd tell you all about it because it's really, really funny. But at any rate, the upshot is I had just had enough of Eric, and I was actually getting sick that day. So I had ended up with strep throat, went home after playing, died for 3 days, and then came back Christ-like and told Eric I quit, and I left the band and I ascended and went somewhere, and I called up Pete and I said, I'm out. And Pete said, okay, I'm out too. And so then it was just the two of us, and we didn't have a name for months. We were just working on our songs. And by October, November, we need a drummer. And there wasn't a good pool in Kansas City for extreme metal musicians. A surprise. But I told Pete, I said, I played with this guy in '86. I've known him since we were little kids. He's a great drummer. And I played him a couple of tapes that Mike and I had made in Mike's basement. Pete's like, yeah, call him up. So we called Mike up, and Mike came over, and we played him this demo that we had recorded in Pete's bedroom. It's just guitars and just bass, but it was so fuzzy. A lot of people thought, well, who's your drummer? There's no drummer on this. It's just bass and guitar. This is the music that we have, and are you interested in joining? And Mike was like, yep, I'm in. And so that was it. And by December of '87, we're rehearsing, and we recorded our first demo in January of '88, and rest is history.
Yeah. So even back then, was it a pre-planned thing where you were going to do only 3 albums, even back in '87?
Yeah. So that was the thing. Pete and I are looking around at our favorite bands, And we noticed a pattern, at least in our minds, there was a pattern. Like a band would get through 3 albums and then they'd lose the plot and start doing something weird. Maybe they were pursuing the cash. A lot of times it was these bands would talk about they want to be perceived more professionally.
Right.
And so you put that together with the fact that, the older you get, the more experienced you are, perhaps the better player you are. You put all those in a big cauldron, you stir it up, and you get the second Exodus album, and you're like, and all of us extreme fans are like, oh, what? No, so, or you get Cold Lake, that was the real turd in the punch bowl for us. And so we noticed this pattern.
Right.
Or what we perceive to be a pattern. And we're like, we're not going to let that happen to us. Even if nobody's ever listens to us, we're not going to let that happen. Whatever we do, there's going to be a limited amount done. And so that was the foundation we based Order from Chaos on. And, the path to success is never there to there. It's always,
right.
that. And so we never envisioned UFC would be doing so many demos and so many 7-inches, and so many singles and 10 inches, but ultimately, we got to the 3rd album and that was it. And of course, by the time 95 rolls around, tensions in the band are pretty high, and it would have been great to keep going, but it was just better to stick with the original plan.
Right.
And I remember, we told Mike about it when he joined, and at that time it seemed so far away. You
Right.
probably think he's probably thinking all to change their minds. As we got closer, it became more of a reality, and we vocalized our intentions to stick to the original plan. Mike was mad. He gave me the cold shoulder for a couple of months, and I don't blame him. I get it. It's just, here's this band it's never going to be huge because we weren't extreme the way extreme was perceived at the time. No blast beats, none of that horse shit, none of those gimmicks. It was just raw, voivodish, Sodom, Bathory, Venom, all in one big cauldron.
Right.
Sort of a Slaughterlord were our big heroes. We're like, this is a band that has done it perfectly. They've taken all these really obvious influences and put them together and become this thing that no one will ever equal. Right. And so we were hoping to be perceived a little like them. Anyway, big inspiration. So we weren't perceived as
they like
extreme.
Pigeonhole Order from Chaos. It's actually hard to compare Order from Chaos to anything. I mean, like you said, it's a mixture of Sodom, Bathory, Slaughterlord, but it doesn't sound like any of those bands. Right.
Well, part of that is due to the shitty production, which is mostly my fault. I never wanted things to sound, like Soul Machine. I've had a difficult relationship with that album since day one, and I know a lot of people absolutely love it, and I'm glad they do. But it wasn't until the last few years that I've really been able to come around to it and make my peace with it, because it's not supposed to sound like that. And if it sounded different, you would be able to hear the influences. If I sat down and played you the riffs, you'd go, oh, that's Legion from Slaughterlord. I hear that in that, but the production is so horrible. It's like somebody smacked a murder hornet nest and, riled them up. You can't hear anything. And so that's really my biggest problem with a lot of the old OFC recordings, is that you can't really hear what's going on. And maybe that's for the best, because we're perceived as something that's really different. I never saw us as any different. I saw us as just wearing our influences on our sleeves like everybody else.
Well, the end result speaks louder than that. I think it's definitely something very unique. I mean, Stillbirth Machine, I don't know what I can compare it to. I mean, I always mention like Sacrilege guitar sound or something, or early Bolt Thor guitar sound, but other than that, it's really unique. I have a hard time telling people what it sounds like whenever whenever somebody asks, what does Order from Chaos sound like? I'm drawing a blank here. Quorthon's vocals over Sacrilege, but it doesn't,
Yeah.
it's somewhere between death and thrash and black. I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's funny because one of the things that I look back on is like the Crushed Infamy era. I wish that I had stuck with that guitar tone on at least Will to Power, maybe Silverth Machine. That guitar tone happened because I had unlimited time in my girlfriend's father's studio, a 16-track studio. And this guy, he recognized in us that we were a big middle finger to the local scene, because everybody, the regular music scene, King hated us. And we didn't like them either. But we were so beyond what they were able to comprehend that it was just better to try to push this, marginalize this Order from Chaos band. By the time we're doing, anyway, that's why Ron wanted to work with us. And also the fact I was dating his daughter, and he thought I was good for her, so he wanted to keep me around, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, I had unlimited time in a studio, and I'll never forget the night I was downstairs. It's probably 3 a.m. working on a guitar tone, and I got so frustrated, I took my Boss heavy metal pedal and I just cranked all the levels all the way over. And this is before Swedish Thing. And I got this tone, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to go with that. And of course, it's not exactly like the Swedish tone because I was using a Marshall MOSFET. It wasn't a tube amp, it was all transistors. And so it had more of an electric, it had a very different tone from just tubes. But it is by and large the exact same tone that they were discovering at the same time at Sunlight. And that was early 88 when all that happened.
Right.
Or maybe spring of 88. Anyway, no, 89, spring of 89. And I just, sometimes I wish that I had kept that guitar tone because I really like it. I mean, my two favorite recordings we did are Crushed Infamy and An Ending in Fire. And, but here I am crying about something I can do absolutely nothing about. Yeah, I mean, I think that if the riffs were more audible, I think people would have a better handle on what we were. But maybe that wouldn't have been such a good thing, because now it's turned into this, Order from Chaos has turned into this cult entity that,
Right.
When I think to young Pete and I sitting around talking about a band, we wanted to be viewed like that, the way we viewed Frost, the way we viewed Voivod, the way we viewed Bathory. We wanted that mystical perception about ourselves the same as they had. So in a weird way, it's kind of happened.
Yeah, it definitely has. I want to talk about the transition from your old band, which was pretty much a cover band, right? The one that you had in 87 with Pete, to Order from Chaos, because I'm thinking that's a drastic change in style if you're covering Metallica songs or Iron Maiden songs and you're all of a sudden playing in this underground death metal band, thrash, whatever you want to call it, Order from Chaos, that sounds nothing like those bands. So you must have been deeply into the extreme stuff back then already in 87. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, back in those days, everybody is, all of us were looking for the next most extreme thing. Every one of us was doing that. And I mean, in the burgeoning death metal scene, that's what we're all about, the next big extreme thing. And is there anything in that band that would apply to your own art? And so we were absolutely that's the way Pete and I were programmed. We programmed ourselves that way. The other two guys in the band, Eric and Dave, not at all. I mean, they were just happy to play in a band and drink beer, and that's cool. But in the early days of OFC, when it was, especially when it was just Pete and I for those couple months, the one thing that was the biggest challenge is, we were both music writers, but when Pete would write music, they were bass parts, and Pete is a spectacular bass player, and he's so good that you don't do that on a guitar. Otherwise, you end up sounding like atheist or something hyper technical, and that's not going to work. I was never going to do that. I'm more of a chord riff, like you said, sacrilege, big influence on me in those days. I wanted things to be big and heavy. So what I would have to do is I would take Pete's bass lines, and I trained in music, piano and trumpet, and so I understand musical theory to a point. And I was able to, even though I wasn't formally trained on guitar, learn that entirely by ear, I still had the rudiments. And so I would take what Pete was doing and do my own thing and write a riff that fit over the top of what he was doing, and at least in my mind would bring out the best aspects of that, or at least allow that riff to be really unique. And I think maybe that's really what people cue off on OFC, is that I can't imagine we were the only band that ever functioned like that. I cannot imagine it. But I think a lot of it is because Pete was so good on bass, better than most other bass players. It challenged me, and at the same time gave me this bigger canvas of things that I could do through the challenge of his bass riffs, that the song would become a signature Order from Chaos.
One of the things that makes Order from Chaos very unique is that the visual aesthetics, lyrical content, ideological leanings, all of these things are very specific to Order from Chaos, down to the Conquer of Fear artwork that sort of evolved from the demo days all the way through and ending in Fire. What was that by design? I mean, obviously it was by design, but how much thought did you guys put into the aesthetics and the philosophical underlining Order from Chaos?
A lot. In terms of the artwork, there's our take on Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, and Pete drew that initially, and it went through several permutations through the years, all the way up to the final version that had the head of Horus, because I mean that he mentions Horus ablaze against the setting of fear in Tenebrae, I think. So as the band progressed, the Vitruvian Man progressed and became this conqueror of fear. And in terms of the conqueror of fear sort of being what Order from Chaos is most known for, the cool thing about that is it was the kind of the song Stillbirth Machine actually technically belongs in the Conqueror of Fear, within those parentheses, because that was the song that really set Pete and us together on the suite of songs that would become Conqueror of Fears. It's 5 songs put together, and it's a progression. You start with you start at the beginning of the Conqueror of Fear, and you get up to Tenebrae, and it's self-realization. Who am I? What am I? Where do I fit in the greater scheme of things? What am I trying to do? And how do I master myself? That's it. And for us, Conqueror of Fear was this open thing that anyone could apply in their lives. Anyone. It was open to everyone. It's in a way, a lot of it's almost just like the power of positive thinking.
Right.
Become more than the swineherd around you. Rise above. Ascend to the plateau of invincibility. And that's what if you take Stillbirth Machine and you go all the way up to the end of Conqueror of Fear, that's what we're talking about. You look at Stillbirth Machine, it's the lyrics are really, really bleak. It's coming from someone who is really confused and really the youthful anger, unfocused, undirected, doesn't really know what to do with it. But the realization that this isn't right, and what am I going to do about it? And Conqueror of Fear is this progression as everything comes into focus. There's a recognition that, well, wait a minute, I do have control over this.
So
I can control my own destiny. How about
Order from Chaos was like the David Goggins of metal. Do you know who he is?
what?
David Goggins.
What?
Do you know who David Goggins is? He's he's a motivational fitness guy who was like 300 pounds and then lost all this weight, and now he runs like 100 miles or something crazy and does 1,000 pull-ups. I follow him on Instagram. He's kind of crazy like that.
Okay.
Order from Chaos. I was just joking that Order from Chaos is like a motivational speaker of metal.
And that's absolutely true. And that's one thing that we were proud of, is that it's, especially with the Conqueror of Fear, it's like, we did this, you can do this too. It doesn't matter who you are. This is open to everybody. Be what you want to be, and truly, yeah, I guess it is kind of a, I didn't know David Goggins, but when I think of motivational speakers, I think of like Tony Robbins and people like that. I think of us as a cooler version of that. But
right. Yeah. And so that whole concept was already in the works back in the beginnings of Order from Chaos. It was something that you guys thought about already.
No, not until probably 90, 91. By that time, the band is 2 years old.
Okay.
The band only existed for 8 years, and I didn't drink back then, so my memory tends to be better than everybody else's, but I still cannot quite pinpoint when we decided that Conqueror of Fear was going to be this long-winded musical journey.
Right.
If you pinned me down and said what's the period that would have happened, it would have been 91-ish. Stillbirth Machine is 90, and we didn't really get going on Conqueror of Fear until after Stillbirth Machine. So it was sort of our middle age, I guess.
Yeah, man, I'm pretty sure that the band Conqueror took the name from Conqueror of Fear. Just knowing Jake.
Probably could have been. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, so Order from Chaos didn't last that long, but it made a huge impact. And I would venture to say that Order from Chaos is bigger now than it was when you guys were around. You did a lot of DIY promotion back then. I remember getting the band fan club zines that you guys were making. And yeah, that was something that bands don't really do these days. And I don't even.
Well, we existed.
Yeah. It was kind of similar to what Celtic Frost was doing, Hellhammer was doing back in the day. Was it modeled after that? Self-promotion, zine?
No. I mean, that was really, although Frost, Hellhammer, that whole thing was a huge influence on us musically and conceptually. The DIY basically comes from the fact that we were from Kansas City, and there's no extreme metal in Kansas City. The closest thing we had was the punk scene, and we were part of that. We went to all the punk shows. I mean, the punk and hardcore was just as influential on us in our early days as anything else, because that scene was where we felt the most at home. And that's where you find the DIY ethos. That's where you find those blueprints of this is how you do it on your own. A band like SNFU would come, perhaps the best live band I've ever seen in my life. They'd come through 4 or 5 times, and it's just this DIY. They threw the tour together. They're calling promoters as they go. We're going to be through. Can we play a show? And fortunately, we had a venue not far from Kansas City. It's actually on the Kansas side. So it's out in Kansas, in Lawrence, Kansas. It was an outbuilding, a cinder block outbuilding in the middle of a cornfield that farmers probably used to store tractors at one point. But at some point in the 80s, it transitioned to a club, and they built a rudimentary stage, and they started doing hardcore shows there. And this place, its reputation grew to the point that I've heard people as big as Ice-T talking about having played at the Outhouse. And they're like, there's this building in the middle of a cornfield, and it's this true, it's like, it was, we would call it a crust punk house now. I mean, it was just total anarchy. There's, there's no oversight. You're in the middle of nowhere. You're 5 miles from the nearest top. You're on your own. And being a punk venue, it worked because it was kind of self-governing, and there really weren't that many problems there, at least that I was aware of. And so it was a great thing for us to have, and it was instructive for OFC. This is how you do it, because we're never going to get any help from labels. I mean, I remember Greenwood approached us in 1990, and they said, yeah, we'll sign you, but you have to change your name. And we're like, no, we're not going to change our name. And so we waited a few more months, then Putrefaction came along. But that's where we learned to do things on our own. And at the time, I worked at a record store, and with a heavy duty copy machine. And they said, if you're going to do personal copies, just use the rubbish paper, the paper that maybe the misprints from somebody, use the back of those. And so to this day, you might find an old Order from Chaos ad with part of some completely unrelated other flyer, advertisement, whatever on the back. And it's because I would go downstairs, I would run off literally hundreds of flyers, and like 6 on a page, and I'd cut them out, and I would, I'd stuff 20 in an envelope whenever I was sending any kind of promo out. And back in those days, I did all the mail. And it made sense because I had the access to the copy machine, could do it for free, basically. And so flyering the fuck out of the underground really helped.
Yeah, no,
days.
They got around because even in Virginia, where I was living, I would go to a gig, and you would see Order from Chaos flyers just at a random cart gig or something, So they got around for sure. You had foot soldiers handing them out.
Well, and I remember when we did the Milwaukee Metal Fest in '91, Richard C. from Wild Rags drove out with a buddy, and Stillbirth Machine was not out yet, but he was doing a lot of good stuff for us. He was printing shirts, he was printing flyers, it was just, he was dragging his feet on Stillbirth Machine. But he drove all the way out to Milwaukee Metal Fest, and he had this gigantic stack of OFC stickers. And so we're just giving them out to people. And that venue was absolutely covered in OFC stickers by the end of the day.
Yeah. So how did you get hooked up with Wild Rags? They did Crushed Infamy, Stillbirth Machine.
God, that is a good question. I don't remember there being a specific point in time other than, I was ordering from them, and I think I must have just approached Richard with, and he had, he would have been stocking Inhumanities and Crushed Infamy, and even Will to Power. And I think he said, yeah, I'll do an album with you. But you remember in those days, Richard didn't give a budget for recording. It was all, you're on your own. And he would release it, but in terms of getting it recorded, you are on your own. And so we were lucky at that point with Stillbirth Machine, because even though I wasn't with Ron's daughter anymore, he still really liked us and liked me and volunteered to work with us on the album. And there was a studio that his brother owned, and his brother was one of the singers, guitarists, whatever, in the old classic rock band Shooting Star. And Gary had this really killer setup in his basement, way out in Olathe, Kansas, where Alex lives now. But it was a full-on 1970 style setup, 2-inch tape, patch bays, effects bays. I mean, closed circuit TV for the drum room. I mean, it was truly a professional setup. And Gary, Ron talked to his brother and was like, "Hey, can we use it? I want to use it for this band." And Gary's like, "Yeah, sure, whatever. Just buy your own tape." And so back then, 2-inch tape, it was $200 for a couple reels. And so we scraped together the $200. We bought the tape, and we would go out and just record at Gary's. And it wasn't as convenient as working at Ron's house, like we had done on Crush Infamy and Will to Power. It was more of a drive, and Ron he really liked his vodka and his Miller Lite. And so we would get about 3 or 4 good hours out of him before he'd start telling us the same story about how he accidentally blew out Rush's lighting rig in a show that his band Missouri played with in 1970, Frozen Stiff. I don't know. They played with Rush, and he spilled a beer on their lighting rig and shorted it out. And apparently they weren't very happy about it. But we heard that story countless times, and it was great. But working with Ron, it was one of those things where I wish he had been a lot more stern with me in terms of how you produce an album, because I thought I knew what I was doing, and I didn't. And like with Silverth Machine, I re-recorded the guitars twice, and I really wish I hadn't done that. But it was frustrating because you'd listen back to what you had recorded that day on the studio speakers, and it sounds like The Return. Like, that's what I want. And you get it home and it sounds like a hornet's nest. And I'm like, what is going on here? It's the difference between listening to something in an idealized studio and listening to the same thing on your shitty stereo. You've got to the right production sounds more or less the same on both, and we were just too stylized in what we were doing. And Ron had no real grasp of extreme metal. I would bring in Bloodfire Death, or and he'd go, "Well, we could do that, but there's a price to be paid when you have a guitar that's this big. Naturally, some other instruments may not be able to be that big." And we had no idea what he was talking about. And by 89, I remember the Napalm Death single "Mentally Murdered" came out. I took that over there and played it for him, and he puts it on, and at first Lee Dorian roar, like the Max L man in a chair, like blown back, like, "I don't think we can do this because that guitar is blah blah blah." And I had no clue what he was talking about. So it ended up just being casting around in the studio until we found something that all of us could live with. At that point, Ron's like, "Okay, I'll mix that."
Yeah. Well, you
I
might
have no idea,
but I think
yeah,
most fans love that album. So it's something.
I'm glad. It's great that they do. And like I said, I've made my peace with it. And I can listen to it now too. It's just I know what I was playing, and most other people don't.
Yeah, something magical happens in the imperfections of recordings and playing. When something is perfect, something is lost. I think that's why I tend to like recordings, because there's something magical about dirtiness, and it brings out the human component of recordings.
Well, and that's exactly the way we feel too. To this day, we're a band that we record ourselves. Even though we have a digital board, we do it as if we're still using 2-inch tape. We don't do any kind of fancy bullshit moving drum hits here and there. We can't do any of that. It's whatever comes out of the performance. That's what we have to work with. And I love stray guitar noise. I think I got a lot of that from loving Voivod. I mean, there are things that you hear that Piggy does, is accidental, but without it, that song's not the same. And so we purposely allow those imperfections on our records. I mean, because even though we're not recording live, we still like that extraneous noise, and we think it, as you said, makes things sound like a human made it. And not just some damn computer.
Yeah. So I guess this is a good transition point, because Voivod is one of your main influences. So people who know you and your career might have noticed that there's a theme of space and astronomy kind of woven into your career. Uh, was that something from your childhood? Fascination with space and NASA and all things space?
Yeah, I mean, it really dates back. I think I've traced it back to, I must have been 6 years old. On my 6th birthday, my parents gave me a telescope and a book on the stars, and that was it. That's been one of my main hobbies. It should have been my profession, but I just didn't have the patience to do the calculus. I got up through Calc 2, and once I looked at Calc 3, I'm like, I don't think I can do this. And at the time, at university, OFC is getting bigger, so I was really distracted. And it was one of those pivotal moments that everybody has in their life. My life could have gone that direction, but instead it went that direction. But I've never lost my love of astronomy and cosmology, and it's stronger today than it really ever was. I do a lot of astrophotography, and things that I'd wanted to do since I was a little kid in the 70s, and I'd see these, and it's a lot easier to do now than it was back then. Technology has made everything so much easier. Back in the day, there were astrophotographers that were using pan film, and they didn't have instantaneous results. They didn't have a screen they're looking at and seeing what the image is looking like and what it's shaping up to be. They had to spend a whole night out there imaging whatever they're imaging, and then develop it and hope it was right. And then if it isn't exactly right, then they have to correct for that. Nowadays, I have a rig where I can stack images live, and stacking just means you're taking an image that's 60 seconds, 120 seconds, 300 seconds, whatever, and taking a series of those and stacking them. And then you get this one image at the very end that blends everything together and perhaps brings out more details than 1, 2, 3 images would. So that's the kind of thing that I do now. Yeah, I've never really lost that bug, that love. As I got older, it was more about cosmology. Where did all this come from? Where is it going? How there's just so much out there that we don't know yet, and it's like endlessly fascinating to me, and it puts everything down here on Earth into perspective for me. I'm not a depressed person, or I'm not a person that's lost a lot, that's kind of lets the world beat them down. It's given me a philosophical perspective, is really what I'm trying to say, that it helps me deal with a lot of the insanity that we face in life. It helps me deal with it well.
I mean, I've known you for 20 plus years at this point, and I feel like you're the most grounded metal musician that I know.
Well, thank you. It's
What about Vulpecula? I don't think we've spoken about Vulpecula too much. So that came after Order from Chaos, and that was a solo project essentially.
So like I was saying, at the end of OFC by 95, things within the band they're getting tense, and we were all growing apart. And musically, Order from Chaos was so focused and so intent on doing this one thing. We would basically run everything through a Slaughterlord prism. Is this what Slaughterlord would do? And that's, while it's fantastic for Order from Chaos, it's kind of limiting. And I had always had this love for space music, the Vangelis, Peter Davison, Brian Eno, and I thought, is there a way to meld these two? And around the same time, you had some of the European black metal bands like Catatonia and Samael that had this really big, huge sound that somehow in my wacky brain, they all got conflated. And I'm like, all right, this is what I want to do musically. And I'm going to talk about the history of astronomy and the sciences and maybe astronomy itself. And then I'm going to do this really big sounding metal that doesn't sound like Order from Chaos at all. And I hatched the concept around 93, but I didn't really do anything about it until OFC was splitting up. And then I brought on Chris Overton, who was playing with Alex in Nepenthe. And Chris was the drummer, and also he was a keyboardist that I can't, this guy was so good at keyboards. He was one of those guys, I'm sure everybody knows one, someone that is socially, you kind of wonder if they're all there, but they are such a genius about something that nobody can compete with, and that was Chris. He was just so good with keyboards, and he knew exactly what I was looking for, and for him it was effortless. And like he did the intro for Fonza Mortalis that we called Astride the Darklands. And I had done the Phoenix of the Creation intro based on something I wrote on piano years and years ago. But Chris did Astride the Darklands. And I remember I knew I was onto something because I sent a rough mix of Fonza Mortalis to Quorthon, and he flipped out about it. He's like, "This is the best thing you've ever done." And I'm like, well, okay, that's pretty darn encouraging. So, push forward with Vulpecula. But again, by the time we got to the material that would be down among them, it's already feeling limited again. It's just like OFC was limiting, Vulpecula began to be constrained. And again, it was because in the very beginning, the idea was I'm going to do this one thing. And this is how it's a self-contained thing, and it doesn't get to come out of this box. And I was feeling the urge by the late 90s to start playing old metal again. And so around 99, I remember one day I just called up Chris, and Chris was one of those guys that he had so many interests that he could take or leave any of them at any given time. And so I said, what do you think about just stopping Vulpecula? And he's like, yeah, then why don't we do that? And so we just put it down and walked away from it. And then years later, obviously, Down Among Them got released by First Invictus in Ireland. And then Jason, Borderville Omen, and you put out the vinyl for it. So Vulpecula got its due ultimately, at least with proper releases. And then you did the re-release of Fonza Mortalis a year and a half ago or so.
Yeah.
So I feel really happy about that band, and I'm even happier now because some of basically all of the ideas that ever existed for Vulpecula have now been covered by Aries Kingdom. So Vulpecula is completely subsumed by what I'm doing now. But yeah, it was one of those things that it wasn't widely known. It's still not widely known. It's way more of a cult thing than Order from Chaos ever was, or ever is, or will be, whatever. And it's very special to me, and I'm really happy with it.
Yeah, that 10-inch is one of the best things that I think you've done, along with Stillbirth Machine, in my opinion.
No, thank you. Yeah. I knew, like I said, I knew I was onto something when Quorthon said, "Man, this is the best thing you've ever done."
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. And Chris actually played in Aries Kingdom early on.
No, he never did. We wanted him to be part of Aries Kingdom as a keyboard player, but it just didn't work. Now, towards the end of Vulpecula, I had this wild idea of bringing Mike into Vulpecula to play drums, and Chris would move to keyboards entirely. And so that was on the table in 99, but it just seemed more advisable to put the band to rest at that point.
Yeah. Was that something that you had pre-designed, just like Order from Chaos? Once you got the urge and the riffs out, that you would stop the band?
No, it wasn't. There was never a plan. It just seemed like as it went on, this is about to evolve into something that I didn't really intend it to, so it needs to end.
Okay.
I had no parameters for Vulpecula.
You mentioned Quorthon and knowing Quorthon. You got in touch with Quorthon in the 80s already, right? And then for those who don't know, you're thanked on Hammerheart. I think you have a special thank you in Hammerheart. Actually, it's not just one of the bigger chunks.
Yeah, the story behind that is I think he called me brother by blood through thunder. And what had happened is in the Order from Chaos days, we had a song called Blood and Thunder, and we put out Crushed Infamy. And I sent him the demo, and he wrote back, he goes, damn it, because that was one of my titles. I was going to use it on the next record. Now I have to change the title. So I actually stole a song out from under him, and I think it became By Blood Through By Blood Through Thunder on eventually it was on Twilight of the Gods.
Oh wow. That's
so but he got me back because about the time he was doing Twilight of the Gods, he mentioned, I'm gonna use some music from Gustav Holst, and I'm like, God damn, I was already planning on using Mars Bringer of War, which I did on Angry Red Planet. Dun, 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 dun. And I thought, well, if you're going to take anything from Gustav Holst and you're a metal guy, you're going to take that. But so I asked him, like, are you using Mars Bringer of War? Because that's what I'm doing. And he's like, nope, I'm using something else. He was like, you're fine. I'm like, okay. So he almost got me, back.
Just the thought of Quorthon listening to Order from Chaos and actually liking it is just mind blowing to me. He
said that he liked to listen to OFC when he was lifting weights, and he was really honest about what he thought. I mean, he wasn't just blowing smoke. He's like, this could be better or that could be better, blah blah blah. And a lot of what I learned how to do in the studio is because of him, because we would talk about how we would record. And when he was working at Heaven Shore, turns out that studio wasn't much more sophisticated than the home studios we were working in. Mm-hmm. So when he talks about multi-layering and all of that, that's how we learned to record on an 8-track cassette recorder that we did Dawnbringer, and we did An Ending in Fire on it, and I Saw Eternity, and the Vulpecula stuff. All that was on an 8-track cassette recorder.
Wow.
And it's because he taught me how to bounce down. Maybe it's the most obvious thing in the world to anyone with a sound engineer background, but it wasn't to us. I mean, we're feeling our way through all this. And so it was him saying, yeah, this is the way I do it at Heaven Shore. And so we imitated that. But yeah, he liked OFC. He really liked Vulpecula. I had sent him a shirt, and he said, I go on summer holidays on my Harley. I love wearing that when I'm out, riding around. So that was quite a pat on the back too. Mm-hmm. The thought that Quorthon's wearing one of my shirts, that's pretty darn cool.
Yeah. What about Aries Kingdom?
Aries Kingdom didn't really get going in earnest before he passed. I had sent him the Chaos Mongers Alive 7-inch that we did. And he enjoyed it, but that 7-inch it's live in the studio. It doesn't really sound all that great.
The demo was already out.
The one thing,
the demo tape was already out by then too, which I really
liked. The demo tape he thought was fine. And in fact, so funny story about the demo tape. So in '96, he and I are talking, and he's looking at what I did in Order from Chaos and what I was thinking of doing, or what I was starting to do in Vulpecula, and he said, I'm working on a new album, which would have ended up being Destroyer of Worlds. He's like, would you write, just come up with a couple of titles for me. Let me consider them. Quorthon's asking you to contribute to Bathory. You don't dare say no, right? So I went a lot further. I wrote Solus Lacus and The Undying Fire. And the lyrics, title, all that, sent it to him. And I was so happy with them that I remember thinking at the time, I hope he doesn't want to use these. And as it turns out, he was comparing what I wrote to what he was writing for Destroyer of Worlds, and he got cold feet. He's like, these are awesome. He goes, but I think that the contrast is too stark. You talk at a level way up here, and Bathory is, you know, we're keeping it pretty darn simple.
Mhm.
And so he broke it to me like I was going to be disappointed, and I'm like, good. I'll use them in Aries Kingdom.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's background on two songs on the demo that a lot of people don't know. Yeah, those were actually written for Bathory.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, speaking of like kind of highbrow, lowbrow, you wrote some lyrics for Abigail on Intercourse and Lust, and
Mhm.
pretty much almost all the lyrics, right?
Half the album. And
Yeah,
I had been working with Abigail since the split they did with Funeral Winds. Like I
right.
think uh Attack with Spell.
Yeah,
That was the first thing I did with Abigail. And again, it was the post OFC world where I'm stretching my legs and just having fun writing again, writing whatever. And you know what fans English is.
right.
You know, the kind of pigeon English that a lot of the international correspondents would write.
Right.
God love them, they were really trying, but they ended up sounding like Borat. And before there was a Borat, and I thought it was absolutely hysterical. I absolutely loved how hard they were trying to speak English, and it was fantastic to me that they cared that much. And yet at the same time, it's so fucking funny,
Yeah,
the way they put things together. And the favorite was I had a correspondence with the guys in Japan in Far East Thrashcore Union, and those guys' English was so funny, and I put it on a pedestal to this day. So like, I wish I could just speak like that.
mhm.
And you'd read the reviews that they would write and the way they would write. It was so wonderful. And so in the post OFC days, I realized I can do whatever I want. Well, I'm going to write some songs that sound like they came from somewhere else, from somebody else, from some other culture. And so when you read like the lyrics for Attack with Spell, I mean, Attack with Spell and My Attack, nobody, we don't talk like that, but it's fantastic because that's the
Yeah,
way the international correspondence and the scene, when they're trying in their own way to write in English, that's the way it comes out, and I love it. I absolutely love it. So so that's how I got started working with Abigail. And then I wrote Birth Rise of the Graven Image for Verathron,
yeah.
and I wrote a track for Mournful Congregation, just lyrics.
Mhm.
I have written one song musically I wrote for Pinnacle
Mhm.
on Under the Black Cross. But yeah, I mean, with Abigail, I was writing for them for Intercourse and Lust, but yeah, half that album is my lyrics.
Yeah. And the contrast is pretty funny too when it goes from your lyrics to just you
Yeah.
lyrics. It just goes from like pigeon English or perfect English to pigeon English.
Well, and then you look at the Barbatos album, Fury and Fear, Flesh and Bone, where Yasuyuki said, "Hey, will you do vocals and solos on 5 songs? And here are the songs, write the lyrics, do the vocals, do the solos." And so I did, and the other half is Joel Grind from Toxic Holocaust. So
Right.
again, the contrast is like ridiculous. It's like
Right.
blonde hair and bitch, and and Fury and Fear, Flesh and Bone.
Yeah.
I took it way too seriously,
Yeah.
but and actually when it came to the Barbatos, I wasn't doing the pigeon English anymore. I was just full on
Right.
doing something meaningful, taking bits of history, writing about things that I would never write about in an Aries Kingdom concept, but able to do it for somebody else. So that
Right.
was fun. But yeah, the contrast is ridiculous.
Yeah. When Abigail came through first time, when I brought them over to San Francisco for a small tour, Ryan Forster and a couple of other guys were staying with me. We ended up writing a song for Barbados. I think the song was "Dick is fucking big" or something ridiculous.
Oh, that's you guys.
Yeah, that was us. Yeah,
That's awesome.
yeah, yeah. And
Yeah, you can't take any of it seriously.
yeah, and I ended up losing my girlfriend at the time because of everyone staying at the apartment. She got fed up, and when we came back from the tour, she was gone.
Gee, I wonder.
Yeah, it was meant to be.
Yeah, right. Turned out for the best.
Yeah. So going back to Quorthon again, when did you first contact them?
It was 87.
Okay.
It was about the time of Enter the Sign. And, you know, at first it was just, you know, I just had no clue what to make of this guy. He's so mysterious. I wanted to get to the bottom of it. So I wrote to him, it's basically, you know, fan banter, whatever. First couple letters were like that. But then for some reason, you know, he kept writing back. And, you know, and I would write him. And for me, it was a thrill because here's this guy that's, you know, even in the 80s, he was still the top guy. I mean, in terms of death metal. And back then, we didn't call it black metal back then.
Right.
It was death metal.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the black metal was Merciful Fate and Venom.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. You know, everybody else was death metal. But, you know, he's the, you know, grand poobah of it all.
Right.
And so mysterious. And what was interesting about it is when I would talk to him about the mystery behind Bathory, he was actually frustrated by all that. He's like, because I tell people the truth. Now, at the same time, we know he was also a jokester. And he would, if there was a media type that was clearly taking the piss, he was going to fire it right back in their face. And so he would deliberately say things to fuck with, you know, a journalist. And we know, we can look back now and know when he was fucking with people. He just wanted to see who was gullible enough to believe, you know, whatever he was saying, whether it was a fake album title or whatever. And it was mainly because he didn't like the interviewer. And he even told me, he goes, I'll if I'm doing an audio interview with someone, I'll record it myself because I don't want to be misquoted. He goes, I'm so tired of all the bullshit. Quorthon is this and Quorthon is that and blah blah. He was so sick of all that. But at the same time, he couldn't help his jokester self of, you know, wanting to mess with people. But yeah, it was a source of frustration that he could never really get control of just because of the way things were. Mm-hmm. And I felt bad for him in that sense. And as I got to know him as a person, you know, we had a lot of common interests, you know, in terms of culture and movies and, you know, music. He's the guy that got me into Kate Bush, you know, and Toya Wilcox, you know, two really big influences on him. We had a lot of things in common, like Sex Pistols. We're both big Sex Pistols fans. Mm-hmm. I couldn't follow him into Kiss. I've never cared for Kiss. I'm never going to care for Kiss, but that's why he changed his name legally to Ace. He loved Ace Frehley that much. But yeah, as I got to know him, you know, and the guy behind all of the mystery and the mayhem, he was a really, really interesting guy. You know, there were a lot of stark differences between us too, big differences. But I think in the end, we were both so interested in how the other grew up and looked at the world that we knew we could trust each other, and we're both comfortable and able to be really honest with each other, and, you know, not judge. And I think he was most fascinated. Seems like back in those days, a lot of Europeans were really fascinated with the American way of life. You know, I grew up in a very conventional household. Father was a major in the Army. He was a police officer for 50 years. You know, I had a very conventional upbringing, and Ace never had that. He only really knew chaos. And so he liked having someone that he could trust, that was from a background that he could respect. Mm-hmm. And yeah, and trust. It was huge with him. Can he trust you? And, you know, his life was just this parade of endless characters that came in. They were episodic here. And you know, this guy was in here for this long, and this guy was in here for this long. And there really aren't too many people that were there with him. In fact, his father even told me, he's like, you knew my son better than anybody else outside the family. Mm. And which was mind-boggling to me. But when I look back and I look at the depth in which we talk to each other, I get, yeah, okay, I can see that. You know, there's one guy now, Rex. Giesland. He worked with Ace from about Twilight of the Gods through to his death, so a little more than 10 years. But a lot of that's just studio. I mean, I think they were bar buddies. They could go out and hang out, but so I know he had friends, but I guess like a lot of us, friends come and go.
Right.
And so the sense of permanence is something that I don't think he had much of. And maybe I don't know, maybe I represented some of that. I don't know. Anyway, the friendship was great. And, because it's not often you get to a mentor transitions into becoming a friend.
Right. Yeah, that's pretty crazy. Did he say whether there were unreleased recordings from the old days? I think that's what everyone wants to know.
Yeah, I mean, there are artifacts left, but my impression is it's all unfinished. And and I guess I've heard whisperings that there are issues with some of the old master tapes. Like there's some master tapes that just don't know where they went. Some of the unreleased recordings, they may be out there, but recently I read an interview with Wolfgang Van Halen, and he had been asked the same thing about unreleased Eddie Van Halen stuff. And he's like, look, this stuff is unfinished, and the only guy that can finish it is dead. It's like, so I'm not doing it. And it's what I've been saying about Ace for years. I'm like, a lot of I think there's stuff left. But with the Jubileums, I think he's released everything he was comfortable with releasing. And I don't really think there's much more left. And ultimately, whatever is left is probably going to need some work. And I don't know who is going to be the person to do that. If, Black Mark were ever to want to do that. I don't know who you should get for that. So, and I don't think that they have any interest in it anyway. And I kind of hope they don't. Because if he didn't think it was good enough to finish at the time, then maybe it's just not good enough. Because he did the 3 Jubileum albums, and there was ample opportunity to pull out more stuff that he thought was good enough.
Yeah. You wrote the liner notes for the anniversary box set that Blackmore did. How did that come about? Was it Boss?
Yeah, so what happened was, I'll never forget 2004. My buddy Russ, who used to write for Terrorizer magazine, he and I are good friends, and we'd taken our daughter to her swimming lessons, and we came home, and I had an email from Russ. He goes, "Hey, did you hear your buddy Quorthon died again?" And again, he died again. Well, because there have been whisperings in the underground through the years, like there are with a lot of mysterious stars, whatever, that so-and-so Paul McCartney died and he's been replaced with a double, that kind of shit. And that actually happened to Ace. And so I fired off an email to him really quick with a link to him. I'm like, "Hey, did you see you died again?" And I'm sitting there waiting for a reply, and nothing. Day goes by, 2 days. Then by about the 3rd day, I think that's when Black Mark made their announcement. And I was like, I didn't know what to do. So I just sent a letter of condolence to Black Mark, because I didn't know his family. I knew who they were, but I had zero contact with any of them. And sent off that letter of condolence and let it go at that. And in 2005, never forget, it was a Saturday. I was watching that Judas Priest DVD, the one that has all the stuff from the old Grey Whistle Test.
Right.
And the mail comes. I pull the mail out, and there's a letter with a return address, Black Mark. I'm like, what the? All right. Well, it was a letter from Buria, boss. And he says, "I know who you are. I know everything about you. My son talked about you all the time, and I need your help." Basically what he said. And I'm like, "Oh," I said, "Tell me more." Well, I'm going to do a box set, an in memoriam box set. I need your help. I was like, "Okay. Yes. I mean, you're not going to say no to that. So, what do you want?" well, the website that Bathory had at the time was something Ace was putting together with the help of another guy, and he was writing everything. That was all him. And so I took that raw text and then I edited it for, a little bit of English, but also to kind of make it in third person and, to properly get the syntax correct and all that. And because that Burya wanted that in the book. And then he wanted me to write a tribute. So I did that. Ultimately, a lot of it went to press before they could make any changes that I wanted, but who cares? It's done. It's great. I know a lot of people were disappointed with the box set because it didn't have any unreleased stuff, but like we just covered, probably nothing really there that's releasable. I hate that term. It is what it is, but truly it is what it is. And I was glad to help. And, and I went over and stayed boss a couple of times. My family and I did, and we would sit around and drink all night and tell Ace stories, and it was really cathartic. It helped both of us a lot. And it was that's how that came about, and that's how it progressed, I guess.
Yeah, what an honor. It's crazy that you went from writing letters during Under the Sign days to writing the liner notes to a box set after his passing. That's
And the wildest point for me was we were there. The last time we visited, I think it was 2008, and they had relocated from Villa Hammerhart, and they had gone out, or Gula Villan, they had gone out to Villa Hammerhart in Bruzelholm. And boss is like, have you ever seen the master tapes? And I'm like, and I'm trying to contain myself, not wanting to be a fanboy. And I'm like, no, I don't think I have. And inside I'm like this, I'm that 18-year-old kid just like, yeah, let's go see him. I think it'd be cool. And we go downstairs into the basement, and he opens his closet. There's all the Black Mark master tapes. He's like, oh, here's the return. Pulls it open. Like, isn't that neat? I'm like, yeah, man, that's pretty cool. Can I have that? And it was one of those things that because we had such a close connection, I don't have a lot of photos from those visits because it wasn't a tourist thing. And it was kind of awkward for a couple each time I would visit, because before we would go back to Copenhagen, where my wife was from, he'd always take me down to the small warehouse they kept on site and goes, whatever you want. And I'm like, I'm not here for souvenirs. He's like, oh, you probably have everything, but there's got to be something you don't have. And so, I remember in 2008, he was like digging around the very back of the warehouse, and he's like, he pulls out this Ancient Oz tour poster with a show they played, I guess, in Stockholm. He's like, how about this? You want this? And I realize now he's just wanting to get rid of stuff. Here you go. You can have that. Because there was really nothing else that I wanted and that he could give me. So it was those were what I'm really trying to say is I have some photos, but I don't have a lot of photos because they weren't those kinds of trips. Right. That's not why I was there. I was able to be with him and with Claudia, and for all of us to help each other come to terms with his early passing. It's really what it was about.
You own
and his sister too. And
I think you told me one time that you own his bullet belt that you wear on stage, or was it his
not bullet belt? Not the bullet belt. It's the. You want to see it? Hang on.
I think everyone wants to see that. This podcast is turning into a Quorthon podcast.
Yeah. So this was his belt that he wore in a lot of the photo sessions.
Yeah.
I used to wear this on stage. I don't wear it anymore. I keep it nice and safe at home.
Yeah.
Was he wearing it was 2006.
Was he wearing the photo shoot for Under the Sign? Was that?
Yeah, I mean, those obviously those are staged photos, but he was wearing this like when he met Slayer outside of L'Amour's in Brooklyn in '86. He was wearing it then. You know, there are a few photo sessions. He didn't wear it in every photo session, but no, it's this studded belt
Right.
that actually began life. There's one thing that he and I had in common is we're both very, very thrifty, and we never liked changing our guitar strings. And his dad would tell me that, you know, son, we can afford a new set of guitar strings. And Ace is like, no, Dad, they're fine. Don't worry about it. And he would boil them, and I would do the same damn thing. You know, I was trying to conserve my guitar strings. Well, if you look at in the box set, there's a picture of him doing the return at Elektra Studios. And at that time, this belt had full studs. But eventually he plucked out a few studs here and there and made other things out of them.
Oh.
And so this is what it became by '86. And you know, it was just funny to me because there were so many things that he and I had in common. Like we would trade tapes too. And one time he sent me, you know, some of his favorite stuff because he's a big classical music fanatic like me.
Mhm.
And at one point he sent me a fun tape. He used to call them fun bits, where it turned out to be the Swedish version of the Jungle Book, the Disney's Jungle Book. He grew up with that. And I'm like, so did I. I used to drive my parents nuts with the Jungle Book, and so did he. You know, Bertie was like, oh yeah, Jungle Book over and over and over and over again. So you know, there's so many things that we had in common, you know, and the thrifty side of him. Yeah, I was a lot like that. Just trying to stretch everything as far as I could.
Yeah.
But I forgot the question now. What was it?
Oh, I think my question was just asking whether you wore it on stage, but I guess not, huh? It's retired.
Oh, yeah. In the old earlier AK days from around 2006 to probably 5 years ago, I would wear it. But nowadays I just leave it at home.
Yeah.
You know, and when it was given to me, it came with a charge. You know, 2006, we're about ready to go back to Copenhagen, and Maria said, like, I want you to have something. I'm like, I didn't come here for souvenirs. He's like, no, Ace would want you to have this. And he hands me the belt. At first I thought it was the guitar strap that he's using in those under the sign photos, but no, it was even better. It was the belt. And Claudia had told me, he's like, you know, you knew him better than most people outside the family, than everybody outside the family, basically. It's like, don't let his memory die. That's all we ask. And I'm like, well, I don't think there's much danger of that, but I'll do my best.
Yeah. I mean, there's no danger in that. I mean, he is already in
No.
it at this point. Yeah. Wait.
Yeah, he's one of the immortals.
Let me go grab this photo to see if he's wearing it.
Okay.
He is not wearing it. He's wearing bullet belt. So
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, that was, I think that photo was taken in London. I think Tony Mottram took those photos. I think that's the same session where he's pouring the Jack Daniels on the big bone. It
Yeah.
isn't actually Jack Daniels. It's tea.
What's the story behind
yeah.
the shipping crate? You know, the one that says to USA or whatever that you posted on Facebook a long time ago.
I don't know.
Mm.
I don't know about that one. I think that actually Professor Black will probably have more to say about that in the upcoming Bathory book. Because he's actually tracked down people like Anne Boleyn that met with Ace in '86 to do the deal for New Renaissance. I think that's where that was taken. But anyway, the forthcoming Bathory book will it'll have traced all of that. There'll be a lot of mysteries erased by this book. So yeah, I'm sure we'll learn more about that then.
Yeah.
The bone I know he lost to Customs.
Mhm. So yeah, you're working very closely with Professor Black. On
Yeah,
the book. Yeah.
yeah, Chris and Cola. Chris had been pursuing me for about 10 years for this book, and I'm like, man, I don't want to write a book.
Mhm.
This is too weird for me. You know, it's like I've never done a Bathory cover either.
Right.
And it's because it just seems awkward.
Mhm.
You know, it's not that I don't want to, it's just because nobody can do it. There's nobody that can cover Bathory,
Right.
period. I mean, you can play the songs, but it's not going to sound right because
Right.
we already know what those songs are supposed to sound like. And so I don't believe in doing Bathory covers, really. You know,
Yeah.
you want to play a riff when you're warming up or whatever, great. But, you know, nobody can cover Bathory.
Mhm.
But you know, what were we saying?
The book.
I'm getting old, losing my
The
the book. Yeah. Yeah, so Chris had been on me about helping him write the book, and I'm like, I don't want to do it. It seems like too much. And he said he finally got me to agree to help him triangulate information
Mhm.
because I saved all my correspondence with Ace. So it a lot of the research has been done now, and we've already triangulated most of the information. And what would happen is Chris would interview somebody, and they've done like more than 60 people for this
Mhm.
book. And Chris would come to me and say, hey, do you have anything that corroborates this story from 1987 or 1990 or whatever? And then I'll go back and I'll find something that he talked about, because he used to write books to me. I mean, they were many his letters were many pages long. And so I was able to go back and say, yeah, okay, well, yeah, he was talking with Carl Walterbach, in 89 about doing the deal. And when we say he, it was probably Buria, because he was the business guy.
Mhm.
You know, Buria had a long history in the music industry. You know, when I would visit, he had gold, silver, and platinum albums, like just sitting on the floor. He hadn't put them up yet, from the Swedish recording industry, for all the work that he did from the 60s all the way up to the 80s. I mean, he was a renowned producer. He was very well known and very successful. And so he knew how to market bands. And so yeah, there's a lot of that laying around. And anyway, yeah, Chris would say, can you corroborate this story or that story? And like, yeah, and most of the time, I mean, I can't even really think of any time I've said, no, they're lying. I don't think no fibs have been told that I know of, or at least nothing that would conflict with what he told me. It's a good sign for the book. It means everything. This is really going to be the most authoritative bio of Bathory.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't doubt that whatsoever between you and Chris behind the project. I mean, there's been other books and whatever written about Bathory, but I'm sure it won't compare to this one.
Yeah, and some of those books are good.
Mm.
And the only issue with them is they're dealing with what's already been known. So they're basically just compiling what we already knew. What Chris and Cola are doing are digging in way deeper. They're doing a proper job on talking to the people that worked with him during this period.
Mhm.
And how did this happen? How did that happen? And, obviously we're not going to know everything because memories fade and people aren't going to remember certain things. But in terms of, is this as close as we can get? Yeah, this book is going to be it. And I don't have any idea when it's going to come out. I haven't talked to Chris for a few months, so I don't know how much more he's written. But it's going to be something else.
Yeah, he wrote me last month and he said he's getting closer and closer. So he seemed pretty confident. Well, Chuck, we're going on almost 2 hours, so I think we'll end it here. But
You got a lot to edit.
yeah. That beginning part was a little choppy, and it's unfortunate that we were talking about Aries Kingdom. I think we have to do another podcast just about Aries Kingdom to do the band justice.
Let's do that. Yeah.
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 So
Yeah, let's do that.
And I think we need to end it with Aries Kingdom. So again, the tour is coming up next week with Bulldozer, Deceased, and what's the last band? Miser. Yeah. And the tour
Miser. Yep.
starts in Houston, right? I think. And then
I think so, yeah. And we're
Yeah.
playing a couple of shows with Miser and Deceased before then.
Okay.
But yeah, with Bulldozer, it starts there in Texas.
Okay, yeah, so I'll see you very soon. Unfortunately, I have to go pick up my wife at the airport at 8 p.m. that night, so hopefully I don't miss Aries Kingdom. Maybe you can try to delay it as much as you can.
Yeah.
But yeah, she's coming back from abroad, so I can't just tell her to take Uber. But yeah.
Yeah, not right now anyway. No.
Yeah. Really looking forward to the gig, and thank you very much for your time. This has been a very interesting conversation. I mean, we covered a lot: OSC, Vulpecula, Aries Kingdom, and of course Quorthon, Bathory. And we could have just done a podcast just about Bathory, to be honest.
Yeah, we could have. But I think it'd be more fun if you did a podcast on Bathory with Chris Cola and I. I think that'd be a lot more fun. And actually,
Yeah.
it'd be mostly Chris, because I think he knows more about Bathory now than any other living person.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll plan that in the future when the book is out. We'll have a three-way conversation about Bathory. All right, well,
Sounds
thank you
good.
very much again, and I'll see you next week.
All right, see you then.
Yeah, thanks everyone.